morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Josh McKelvin. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Kelly Ayotte certainly has a unique insight on national defense and the threats to our national security. And lately, of course, the focus has been on the emerging threat posed by a possible nuclear Iran. And last week, Senator Ayotte backed a bipartisan Senate solution which basically committed to Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And Senator Ayotte is our guest this morning. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be back with you.
You were on the program just a few weeks ago, and you said you had no doubt in your mind that they were trying to build a weapon. So let's operate under that belief right now and move to the next question. How far along are they? How far away do you believe they are?
Well, it's hard to determine, but just let's put some facts out there. They have built an underground nuclear facility, the Fordow facility. They have kicked out the weapons inspectors. We talked to the wife of a nuclear scientist who was killed, and she said that her husband got up every day. His ultimate goal was the annihilation of Israel. This is a regime that is not allowing UN inspectors in. It's very clear what their goal is. And with the sanctions, the economic sanctions that are imposed here, they're not backing off. They're continuing their efforts to make sure that they can acquire a nuclear weapon. So I think that they are along their way, and that's certainly what our national security advisors have said. The question is, can we stop them from doing it? I think all of us agree on a bipartisan basis. The goal has to be to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. With economic sanctions has to be obviously the first way to try to stop them. But that military option has to be on the table, unfortunately, because they don't seem to, at this point, be responding in the way that they should to economic sanctions.
From the evidence that you've been able to gather on the Senate Armed Services Committee and talking to others in Washington, is there any way that we may be mistaking, aside from what the wife of the scientist had to say, mistaking what they're building there as an energy program rather than an offensive weapon program?
You don't build an energy program underground, so that they've said they're doing it so they can avoid an airstrike, and also the types and the amounts of uranium that we know that they've been enriching are not consistent with just nuclear energy. So I don't think there's any doubt from what we know that they're along their way to producing nuclear weapons capability. And we need to stop them from getting that capability, because let's just put this in perspective. Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. They've sponsored terrorist groups like Hezbollah, Hamas. They've collaborated with Al-Qaeda. They're supporting insurgents in Afghanistan to kill our troops. They're fueling sectarian violence in Iraq. And just think about what happened in October of 2011, where Iran was connected with an incident in Washington, D.C., where they tried to kill the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the United States. These are just some of the examples of what this regime is doing. There's no question that their intent, unfortunately, is not the type of intent of a friendly nation. And they've also said that their goal is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And so if you're our friend and ally Israel, this is a great concern to them as well. But this isn't just a concern to Israel. This is a concern to all of our national security, because if Iran gets a nuclear weapon or gets nuclear weapons capability, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, and Secretary Panetta, this will also could fuel an arms race within the Middle East towards other nations getting nuclear weapons capability, and that obviously would undermine the safety of the world. And finally, one thing that troubled me the most, I asked in a hearing with Chairman Dempsey this past week, I asked him about what would happen if Iran did get a nuclear weapon. Could they give it to a terrorist group? And he told me that is a real risk. That is not a risk we can afford for our country or for the safety of the world.
Given that, and everything that you just cited over the last couple of minutes, given the gaps of intelligence, if we have no idea, basically, that we don't know how far along they may be in building a weapon, how long can we afford to wait?
Well, first of all, we have passed tough sanctions on a bipartisan basis, And we know that those sanctions are having some effect on Iran, and we're still pursuing that vigorously.
But we don't know the effect. It's scarier by the day.
Well, certainly we know it's had some effect on Iran, and we've seen indications of that. And also there are opportunities for even tougher sanctions. In fact, there was a deadline that passed this week where we expected the administration to come out with even greater sanctions on other foreign financial institutions. So there's still other ways we can come down on them economically. I also think we have to hold, for example, China and Russia's feet to the fire, making sure that they impose sanctions on Iran as well, because this is an issue that could undermine the safety of the world if they obtain a nuclear weapon.
Tough to go it alone on this one. All right, next week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to go to Washington. Realistically, I mean, you just said, we've heard what Ahmadinejad has had to say in the past. He said, well, I never said that, but the message is still the same. They don't want Israel there. How long can we expect them to stand pat?
And I think that if you're the sovereign nation of Israel, which is, of course, a very important and strong ally and friend of the United States of America, if you listen to what statements that the Iranian regime have made about Israel, about wanting to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, you can understand why Prime Minister Netanyahu feels that this is an urgent threat to the safety of his country, but it's also an urgent threat to the safety of the world, really. And so I expect this will be the topic of discussion between he and the president. And I think what Israel wants to know is, will we support them? Will we have their back if they have to step? And obviously, we need to work with them as much as possible to make sure we impose the toughest economic sanctions so we don't have to exercise that military option. But I expect that the Prime Minister will be looking for support from us. I think we should give him that support.
But clearly the dynamic changes if Israel were to launch a first strike rather than the U.S. launching a first strike, because then collectively a lot of countries in the Middle East will coalesce around Iran, and then we have a bigger problem. So.
Well, it certainly puts Israel in a difficult position. But if you're talking about a country that is seeking to obtain nuclear weapons capability and is talking about annihilating your country, you have to take steps as a sovereign nation to protect your country. So I can understand why Israel certainly has that option on the table. Our military leaders have said that certainly a military option is on the table for the United States of America, because this is not just a risk to Israel. This is a risk to the United States of America. If Iran gives a nuclear weapon to a terrorist group, that could target any nation, including our own, and we can't allow that to happen.
Let's talk about national defense as a whole, too. You've been very active down there. Obviously, last year the Super Committee failed to achieve, what was it, I think $1.2 trillion in cuts.
Trillion,
right. It didn't matter because it never happened, which automatically triggered something along the lines of $600 billion in cuts to the defense. That's something you want to restore. Talk about where we've been able to determine these cuts are coming from. Are we talking intelligence? Are we talking across the board?
Well, let's just put this in perspective, okay? Under the debt ceiling deal that I voted against in August because I thought it was misguided in the first instance, it didn't look at the entire budget. It didn't deal with the fundamental drivers of our debt. And finally, it put our defense right on the table, our national security. So under the initial part of that deal in the 2013 budget, the defense will have to reduce spending approximately $487 billion. Now, there are a lot of tough choices in that. The Department of Defense has proposed reducing our ground forces by 92,000 just in that initial set of cuts. Then on top of that, coming in January of 2013, because the Super Committee didn't do its job in coming up with the other spending reductions, the Department of Defense is on set to take another $500 to $600 billion worth of cuts. Secretary Panetta has said that will undermine our national security for generations. It will hollow out our force. It will be devastating to our military in their ability to protect our country. So I've offered, along with other senators, an alternative to those cuts, other spending reductions, because I don't think that we should put a national security crisis on top of our fiscal crisis. And you think about, why did we form a government? We need to protect our country. It's right in our Constitution. And when the Secretary of Defense tells me that we're going to hollow out our force and undermine our national security and put our country at risk, I take that very, very seriously. That's why this is an important issue that, in my view, should be addressed right away on a bipartisan basis. If we're not safe, we don't have anything else.
And how much could this possibly cause us to backslide and cost us the progress, whatever progress we have made in Afghanistan and in Iraq? I mean, you pointed out that Iran is arming insurgents. They're trying to do whatever they can to destabilize Iraq, and if we weaken our military...
You know, Secretary Panetta said just this last week, about 2 weeks ago, he was asked about if sequestration went forward, what would the impact be just in being prepared to deal with Iran if, God forbid, we had to take military action there. And he said that it would put us at risk, that it would actually undermine our capability of doing that. So this is a real issue that has to be right away by Congress. That's why I've offered, along with others, a proposal to stop the sequestration. I do not think we also, when you think about our military men and women, we can't hollow out our force. When we send our men and women into conflict without the equipment they need, the support they need, and with the right amount of troops, then we put them at risk as well, and that's not right. Last question, and then we'll move on to other topics about Iran. What if they do follow through with their threats and close the Straits of Hormuz? I mean, obviously, we're seeing gas prices right around $4, $5 in some areas of the country. Well, certainly we've heard them, a lot of discussion about them threatening to close the Straits of Hormuz. That will have an impact on gas prices, but is that an act of war? I think it's a hostile act, absolutely, but I know that we have assets in that area to prevent them from doing that, and I'm confident that we will prevent them from doing that. And I actually think right now they're just threatening it. That's my view of it, but I know for a fact that our military is prepared to deal with that and to stop them from closing those key straits.